Something was strange. Dan looked at his neighbor's garage. The door was open, and trash cans were spilling out into the driveway. It wasn't like Kyle to leave doors open. Raccoons cause a lot of trouble in this neighborhood. He walked up to the house and noticed a newspaper on the lawn. That was a little unusual. Kyle ran every day and always stopped to pick up the newspaper. He also never left the front door open. Kyle was a theater technical designer and was constantly working with sound or lighting in his home studio. Such projects often required silence or darkness, and for that reason, as well as the raccoons in the woods bordering their backyard, he had developed the habit of buttoning the house up tight unless he or Ginny were out in the yard. Dan knocked on the frame of the open door and called inside to see if anyone was home. Just as he was about to call to see if everyone was okay, he saw Kyle lying on the floor in the doorway of his studio. A small pool of blood had formed under Kyle's head. His face looked battered. His arm was bent backwards at a terrible angle, and bruises could be seen all over the places not covered by clothing. Kyle had been beaten in his own home and left without help. Dan quickly dialed 911 on his cell phone while simultaneously calling for Jeannie. He managed to contain the adrenaline rushing through his veins to give the 911 operator all the information he could, and then he rushed from room to room to make sure she wasn't lying in another room needing his help. She wasn't there. Dan barely had time to look around the house before a police car pulled up with its lights on. An ambulance came after it, and while the paramedics treated Kyle, the police officers questioned Dan about what he had found. While Kyle was being taken to the emergency room, the only question on everyone's mind was, "Where's Jeannie?" Going to black. Kyle and Jeannie met in college. They were both in theater programs at theater schools in New York City, in the heart of one of the most active theater communities in the world. Ginny studied to be an actress, learning how to create the illusion of a story on stage. She was good at it, but for some reason she had a hard time taking directions and preferred to give them. Her teachers noticed this and took notice of how creative her ideas could be. They began preparing her for a career as a director or theater manager. Kyle was fascinated by the behind-the-scenes magic of theater. He didn't have to create illusions as an actor. He created different realities with sound, lights, effects, and sets. He made it easy for the audience to believe in the actor's work. Kyle was immediately recognized as a genius. He was one of those rare talents who understands all aspects of technical theater, and it was as easy for him to create lighting as it was to create a sound story. They met when they were both hired to participate in a summer project in Connecticut the summer after their freshman year. Ginny had been invited there as stage manager for her mentor and professor, who had just been hired as director for 2 of the company's 4 summer productions. Kyle had worked there the previous 2 summers as an electrician, and this year became assistant lighting director and got the opportunity to design one of the shows. Working closely together, the two took an immediate liking to each other. This would be the first of many productions together, both as students and as they built careers in the field. Ginny was slender and graceful, with a killer smile under her deep brown eyes. She was delightfully curvy in all the right places, but without a single speck of extra weight. Her long tanned legs peeked out of the shorts she always wore, and her outerwear was conservative enough to say, "Please behave yourself," yet revealing enough to say, "I might have a surprise for you." Kyle was very handsome. He was an avid runner and claimed that the best ideas came to him during his morning workout, when his brain was clear of the mishmash of everyday distractions. He looked like he exercised regularly, but he didn't really need to. The daily lifting and picking he had to do was a perfect substitute for the strength training his friends advocated. He was trim and slim, and was sure that if he continued to pursue his projects, even as a designer, he would stay that way for life. For 2 weeks, they shouted at each other from remote corners of the theater, focusing lights, directing special effects speakers, and calling out lines before they were finally able to sit down with each other. They had to program the signals on the light board, and as they sat together became more and more friendly. When they were done, Ginny leaned over and kissed Kyle on the cheek, telling him that she really enjoyed working with him and that he was the reason she looked forward to her work every day. Kyle kissed her back, just not on the cheek. She responded, and their little tete-a-tete in the control booth got pretty hot. The door to the theater downstairs opened and slammed shut as the director walked in and called out to them. "Kyle, Ginny, are you guys done yet? We need to close up." They quickly cleaned themselves up and came down from the stall. All done, and you're going to love it, Ginny replied, walking down the stairs with Kyle walking ahead of her, intent on hiding their little date. They had started looking for opportunities to be together, but as filming began, time became precious. Ginny drove with her professor every day from her apartment in the city, while Kyle stayed home, a short drive in the other direction. One day, Ginny's professor didn't come to the show, but stayed in town to celebrate her daughter's birthday. Ginny was supposed to be in charge, but she had no place to stay. Kyle offered a guest room in his house. No one else was there since his parents were spending the summer on the Cape, so there was plenty of room. Ginny was thrilled. She didn't think they would need much space. One bed would be enough. By the time they reached his house, it was late. Ginny had fallen asleep in the car, and he didn't want to distract her by taking advantage of the fact that she was so tired. After all, she had become special to him. He didn't have feelings for her like he did for those superficial girls he picked up at a college party or one of the many theater parties after a play. So when they arrived at his house, he was the perfect gentleman, the perfect host. He led her to her room, at least the one where she was supposed to sleep, and made sure she was settled in. Then he snuck into his own room to rest. He would still have time for a visit the next day. He vaguely felt the door to his room open and someone lying in bed with him. Soft, slender arms wrapped around him, and the sweetest kiss he'd ever experienced lingered on his lips. It felt good. Kyle? Kyle? Get Dr. Kenton. He's waking up. Kyle! His vision faded, and the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room appeared before him. It was hard to focus, and he was completely confused. Only one eye was working. He tried to rise, but he was held up and immediately began to struggle against the restraints. Easy, 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 Kyle. You've been in rough shape, but we'll get through this. Don't fight us. We're on your side. He relaxed on the bed and looked up at the post-op nurse who was talking to him. Dr. Kenton would be right in and explain everything. What's wrong with my eye? Kyle became alarmed when he realized his eye was heavily bandaged. It was badly hurt, but I have to wait and let the doctor talk to you. Calm down, he'll be here in a moment. The doctor did indeed arrive very soon. He examined Kyle and talked about his injuries. Kyle was battered. His eye was bandaged as it had received at least one serious blow. The optical surgeon repaired the detached retina, but the skull fractures around the eye socket also had to be repaired. He had suffered a fairly severe concussion as a result of the blow that caused those injuries, and they were very relieved to note that he was still in control of his speech. Kyle's arm was badly broken and was in a cast. He had nearly died from a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding. If a neighbor had found him an hour later, he would not have survived. His nose and several ribs were broken. He had been unconscious for 2 days since they found him, and they were still trying to determine the time of the attack to figure out how long he had been lying unattended. I don't remember the attack. The doctor frowned and started asking Kyle questions. When he realized that Kyle couldn't remember any circumstances related to the weekend or Friday, he started asking general questions. When he was done, Dr. Kenton realized that Kyle couldn't remember anything that had happened since freshman year, before his encounter with Ginny. Kyle had suffered severe memory loss as a result of the attack, and only time would tell how soon it would return. Detective Porter, who was assigned to investigate Kyle's case, was visibly disturbed. His chronology of the incidents leading up to the attack had hit a dead end last Friday when Kyle had disabled the home's security system. Where had Jeannie been all this time? A shade of black. Senior year passed like a blur. Kyle saw Ginny regularly, and their love grew every day. By the end of the year, both had careers, with Kyle working regularly as a designer for several small suburban homes and often going backstage at theaters downtown for famous designers. Ginny got a backstage job with a major opera company at Lincoln Center, a stable job with great benefits that she could keep for life. They rented a small apartment around the corner from her theater and enjoyed the bustling performing arts scene in the city. He remembered the tender moments they had spent together. She had tastefully decorated and shopped, and their apartment was furnished so luxuriously that it had become a popular hangout spot for their friends. He was a gourmet. Whether he was cooking dinner for himself and company or just a candlelight dinner for the two of them, she always rolled her eyes in delight at the sight of his delicious cooking. She rolled her eyes in bed too. Kyle woke up in a cold sweat, still lying in the hospital bed. Ginny. How Ginny fit into his life now. He had been told about the amnesia and how slowly it could come back. He had been told that these attacks would happen from time to time and he would almost relive his life as the oldest lost memories would return first. He wasn't prepared for the vivid dreams and the thoughts of lovemaking that would disturb him. Before, Kyle could only think of Ginny as a girl he knew from summer company, but now the memories of living with her came back to him. He really wanted to remember how she had fit into his life in the years that the concussion had taken from him. Where was Ginny now? Memories of their early life flooded through his mind during the days that followed. Her advancement in her career had eventually led to a position as stage manager at a very active suburban theater that put on plays and concerts. This troupe liked Kyle's work and often utilized his services. The couple succeeded financially and decided to get married. Now he could remember the wedding. The ceremony in the small church flashed before his eyes in great detail. He could hear the small organ playing Bach, smell the distinct scent of beeswax candles burning at the altar, and his eyes widened at the sight of the smiling bride walking toward him. He could taste the delicious food in the little Greek restaurant where they had their wedding feast. They danced and then hugged family and friends as they drove to the small inn where they were to spend their wedding night. Everything was beautiful. The room had a fire burning in a brick hearth located right at the foot of their bed. They stood by the flickering flames and kissed. They swayed to music that wasn't there. With tenderness, he undid the buttons on her satin dress. As elegant as she looked in it, the glow of the fire further emphasized her nakedness. His body was beautiful, and she slowly moved closer to Kyle, taking him into her arms. He responded to her passionate kisses and pulled her onto the bed. That night, they made love slowly, taking their time, exploring every inch of each other's body. They kissed every inch of each other, and when they finished making love, they stared into each other's faces for hours, dreaming of a long life together and old age. In the morning, they woke up the same way they fell asleep, face to face, looking at each other. Kyle woke up again in his hospital bed in a cold sweat. He still couldn't stay awake for long, but he always woke up upset when his dreams included sex with Ginny. Why did he always wake up like this? Was he still married to Ginny? If so, where was she? He asked the nurse to tell him what they knew about him. "I can't do that," she replied. "I don't know enough about you to fill in all the blanks. I can help you remember, but if I prompt something wrong, it could lead to more serious problems. Unfortunately, your concussion and eye condition require you to remain calm and quiet. Stress is undesirable right now, my friend." Dr. Kenton stopped by during his evening rounds. He was pleased to see that Kyle remembered events all the way back to his wedding, but there was still a 15-year difference between them. He agreed to give Kyle some information, but on the condition that Kyle would take it calmly. "So, you're still married to Jeannie, according to the neighbor who found you and saved your life. You're still working as a freelance theater designer, and you're doing quite well. You have a beautiful home not far from this hospital. You and your wife have no children, but otherwise you're the stereotypical happy couple living the American dream." Now that Kyle looked more alert and sane, the doc talked again about the seriousness of Kyle's injuries. They were sure he would make a full recovery from everything. He went into detail about each injury, and Kyle heard nothing but blah, blah, blah. He didn't hear the answer to the question he wanted to ask, and could only think. Where was Ginny? Ginny lay down on the dock by the lake. The water coolly touched the fingers of her hand stretched over the edge. Clouds hung overhead, rolling slowly over the hills that rose steeply on either side of the lake. She was in another world, away from the city rat race, away from the constant demands of the snotty prima donna actors and musicians who came to perform on her stage. She was also far away from Kyle. She didn't know what to think of that realization. She was sure she still loved Kyle, but he was such a workaholic. He could never find time to relax, and his schedule was so busy that she just didn't feel that their time together was a priority. This little vacation with Steve was just what she needed. What could Kyle do to her? Divorce her? Great. She looked over at Steve. He was standing on the beach with his back turned to her, kneading dumbbells in the sun, finishing his morning workout. Muscles bulged up and down his back, huge arms glistening with sweat. Steve had been a star college soccer player and had played several seasons in the NFL before injuring his knee. Now, Steve ran a local chain of fitness clubs and kept his body trim. He was smart about money and hired a manager who invested his NFL earnings in real estate. Who cared that he was dumb about everything but money? He couldn't sustain a conversation about anything but soccer and bodybuilding, but when he enclosed her in his arms, it was like something out of a dime novel. She passed out as he lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bed. Okay, Kyle, she pondered. Get a divorce. We don't have kids, and look what I'll get. I'll be married to Mr. Universe. And I'll be Mrs. Universe. I'll trade the dusty theater for a gym where I can work out whenever I want, or spend all day admiring bodybuilders in lycra tights if I want. She couldn't wait for him to call. After Kyle had confronted them at the house when they'd left last Friday, she'd half expected the bailiff to be here waiting for her with divorce papers. She picked up her phone for the 100th time today to make sure it was working and ready for his call. The battery was charged. The signal was full, thanks to the convenient tower she'd spotted at the top of the hill. The ringer was on loud, but there were no calls from Kyle. They hadn't called from work since she had arranged this week of vacation months ago. Kyle hadn't called in a week after begging her not to go with Steve. How can you beg someone for attention 1 minute and then not call for a whole week? And now it was Friday, and she hadn't heard from Kyle. She sat on the dock. Her naked body glistened from the week's sunbaths, which she'd taken all day, and from visiting various wineries and taverns each evening. She adored the Finger Lakes. The evening sun illuminated everything around them so beautifully. Why did Kyle always insist on vacationing at the cottage on the Cape? No crowds, no small beaches, just the quiet solitude of the woods. Kyle again. She couldn't get rid of thoughts of him. Why hadn't he called? It was so strange. She sat down and dialed her home number. The message service answered. It wasn't pleasant to hear a recording of her own voice in response. She left a message in Kyle's box saying she'd be home early Sunday morning and they could talk then. Hanging up, she sat pensive, not letting the phone out of her hands. Maybe there wouldn't be a divorce. Maybe Kyle would roll over on his back and beg her to come home. Yes, from now on, he'd be on his best behavior, cooking clean and keeping her in a manner befitting a goddess. Oh yes, silly Kyle will fulfill her every whim while she runs around enjoying the stunning body of her stud Steve. Kyle should be home. If he was pissed, why didn't he call? And if he wasn't pissed, how did he feel? She knew he didn't have a show this weekend. He hadn't been home, he hadn't called in a week or even texted. This was really weird. He was robbing her of the arguments she had mentally rehearsed since he left. She wanted this argument. She wanted to see his passion, and he wasn't even satisfying her now. She called home again and this time entered the code for her personal message box, not the shared family box. It was full. The neighbors called, Kyle's mom and, most disturbingly, Detective Porter. Apparently, Kyle was badly hurt. Apparently, his injury had gotten the attention of the police. Oh God. Thoughts raced through her head, but finally she remembered the last time she had seen Kyle. Kyle was kneeling on the floor begging her not to leave. He clutched at her bag, assuring her that nothing could be so bad that she would leave like this without warning him. She had expected a more dignified response and thought such behavior unworthy of him. Honestly, I don't know how you can expect me to respect you as a man. Stand up and face the facts. You don't treat me like I'm important and Steve does. You put light bulbs on the chimney and Steve lifts me into bed in arms so strong it takes my breath away. You complain that I don't make passionate love to you anymore anyway. So what are you missing? I need a week. I need a vacation, but not on the Cape. I need to find out how another man can make me feel what it's like to be adored. She looked at him contemptuously as he sat back down. Steve stood in the doorway and chuckled softly. It made her giggle too. Be a man. Let me go. If he doesn't step forward, I'll come back next week and we can talk. Kyle let go of the suitcase. If you leave, everything will change. We'll never go back to the way things were before. What makes you think the place we were in was so special? She picked up her bag and headed for the exit. I'll be right there, Steve said. I just need to say something to that little wimp. As Ginny walked to the car, Steve walked over to a sullen Kyle kneeling in the hallway. Steve's massive hand guided his fist into the back of Kyle's skull. The beating was short but inconclusive. Since Kyle's face crashed into the baseboard from the first blow, he was unconscious from the start. He didn't feel Steve punching him in the gut or striking him with his fists. He didn't feel his spleen tearing, his bones breaking. Steve wanted to leave Kyle with a memory of intense pain so he would wake up. He left without closing the door, got in the car with Ginny, and drove north to the lake. Ginny smiled the whole way. She remembered how she had met Steve last winter. Kyle had always stayed so trim and slim thanks to running and lots of exercise at work. However, she had gotten a little fat and, although not obese, looked much closer to 40 than her husband of the same age. She signed up at Steve's gym and contracted with him as a trainer. She still remembered the first time he had fondled her in the hot tub when the two of them were there together. She had been so enchanted by his caresses that she had let Steve take her upstairs to his apartment. It was unlike anything she had experienced with Kyle. Kyle had gone on a business trip to oversee the touring company of his last show in Chicago and had been gone for a week. He had even called her and fondly told her how much he missed her that first night, that very moment. Kyle hung up the phone with a quiet, "I love you." Jeannie said, "I love you too," though addressing Steve instead of Kyle. She had sex with Steve that week until Kyle came home on Sunday, too tired from traveling to make love. That was a good thing. Ginny woke up from her afternoon reverie in alarm. She was concerned about Kyle's condition, for she really still loved him. She was also concerned about the ominous message left by Detective Porter, asking her to contact him about Kyle's beating. He wasn't calling to inform her of the attack, but rather that she already knew about it. She saw the bulky figure of Steve finishing his push-ups on a low-hanging branch. "Steve, what did you mean when you said it's settled? He's defeated?" Steve looked up. "What do you mean?" "Last Friday, at my house, when we were leaving and you came out of the house following me, you said, 'It's settled, he's defeated.' What did you mean by that?" "Well, you know, just marking his new territory. I had to let him know who's boss in the house. There's only one in charge in any pack, kid, and I'm going to make sure I'm yours." "Steve, what did you do?" "I punched him in the nose. Gave him a little rough treatment. Nothing major." "Yeah, Steve, the police left a message on the answering machine. Kyle is badly hurt." "Not me, babe," Steve lied. "He was awake and moaning when I left. Maybe he got sick after he got drunk or a mugger beat him up after we left." "We should go back." "No way," he replied. "We have 2 more days to sunbathe and drink and 2 more nights to have sex." "Steve, this is serious. Kyle is badly hurt and the police will get suspicious that I wasn't there and didn't make contact. It won't be good if you hit him. He'll come in beaten up and we won't be back. You want to trade 2 nights of sex for 2 years in jail?" She ran into the house and packed them both up. When she came out, Steve was stowing his most important personal items, dumbbells, in the trunk of his car. "Okay, maybe you're right," he said. "Let's go." They threw the bags in the trunk, locked the cab, and sped south. It was getting dark. Friday morning, the bandages were removed from Kyle's eyes. His body was finally free from the effects of the trauma and anesthesia from the surgeries. He was alert and flirting with the nurses. Repeated conversations with the police had so far yielded nothing, which was frustrating for Detective Porter. Kyle fondly remembered his pleasant home life with Ginny, his work on the show until about a year ago. He also remembered some big project involving his studio. Something to do with his recording equipment, something to do with sound effects. It kept him occupied, but he couldn't figure out what it meant. He also remembered the intense pain. Somehow it was connected to the pain in his head, but he couldn't figure out how. He slept soundly Friday night, knowing that he would be able to go home on Saturday. When Kyle was already asleep, Ginny came home to a dark house. Steve carried her bag into the house, and they were both stunned to see a notice taped to the door stating that it was a crime scene, but it had been processed and the occupants could return. As they entered the house, Ginny froze at the sight of a large puddle of dried blood on the floor in the hallway where Kyle lay. She looked over at Steve. "Just punched you in the nose, huh?" Steve blushed. He might be a little too angry, and if he left Kyle in critical condition without help, he might be accused of something more than a simple assault. His mind searched for an explanation. He was out of his mind and not exercising precision. "We can't tell the cops I hit him," said Steve. "We have to tell them that I left first, taking your bag to the car, and that he was fine when you left." "That's not good, Steve. This is really bad." "Ginny, stick to the story and everything will be fine. We'll look like nickels since we left and weren't around him. but they won't be able to pin anything on us. We? Asked Ginny incredulously. I was in the car. Anything they pin on you will be on your sorry hide, not mine. Breaking up with Kyle, even divorcing him, is one thing. Going to jail for beating him up is quite another. You were with me, kid, and you heard me say he was defeated. You're in this with me. I may not be the smartest guy on the block, but I know what an accessory is. She thought about it and realized Steve was right. She couldn't explain their sudden departure unless they claimed they'd left Kyle in good shape, leaving the possibility that someone else had come along and beaten him up. How did she even get into this mess in the first place? She agreed with Steve, and they laid out their story. By the time they decided what to say, it was almost midnight. She called Detective Porter, and he said he would meet them at the police station immediately. The case was urgent and couldn't wait until morning. Ginny wanted to go to the hospital first, but Detective Porter insisted. He told her that Kyle had been medically discharged and was probably resting. He pointed out that she had taken the time to visit Kyle when he was in critical condition, and even today she had gone home, rather than going straight to the hospital. There was no reason to disturb his peace, so necessary to his recovery. But there were still questions that needed to be answered. Ginny answered nothing until the detective suggested that the patrolman pick her up and drive her. She and Steve got into the car and drove to the station. They were questioned separately, but both had already rehearsed their story. They didn't tell much, relying on, "I don't know." They admitted that they were in the house and saw Kyle. They admitted that he was very upset when they left, but physically he was unharmed. Porter didn't believe them, but he had no evidence to back up his hunch. He knew that Kyle was being discharged from the hospital today, so he decided to keep them both in isolation until Kyle got settled in and until Porter could alert him that his wife was coming home. Besides, it might give Steve and Jeannie a chance to believe that the other had blabbed and given away the truth, and perhaps encourage them to communicate more freely. Porter waited for Dan, Kyle's neighbor, to bring him home. Kyle cautiously stepped outside, still very sore from the savage attack. He waved for Porter to come inside. Dan's wife, Kim, arrived early and cleaned up the hallway. The house was cozy and smelled nice. She smiled as she came out of the kitchen and invited everyone to the table for a home-cooked dinner. Although Kyle appreciated Kim's efforts, especially cleaning up the reminders of what had happened, he felt uncomfortable being at home. He coldly recalled the events of the past week up until the day of the incident, and the absence of those final fragments upset him. Kim and Dan cleaned up the kitchen and said their goodbyes. They agreed with the other neighbors that they would check on him every hour or two and make sure he was okay, at least through the weekend. They assured him that if he needed anything, he should call right away. As they were leaving, Detective Porter looked at Kyle and said, "She'll be home soon, you know that." "I know. She's been here before." Kyle nodded at Ginny's bag by the door. "I know. I held them off today to make sure you were okay and ready to meet her. He'll probably be with her." "I'm ready." Detective Porter noted the determination in Kyle's voice and the hardness in his eyes. "I want to show you something." Kyle led Porter into his studio. Porter was struck by the abundance of sound, digital, and computer equipment in the room. Kyle led him over to a computer workstation connected to a large mixing console. "This is my main sound recording setup. I have a lot of interesting files here. Some of them I had forgotten about until I remembered just a minute ago. One memory has been plaguing me for the last day or two. Something to do with a project I was working on but couldn't remember. When Dan and Kim left, it reminded me of another couple leaving the house. The one that left the house last Friday, just before I was attacked. Perhaps I was recording something when they came to call and didn't turn off the recorder. Perhaps there is an audio file here that will explain the situation to you if something happened to me. I may have recorded everything from the time Ginny and Steve left here until the recording reached the limit that was set at 12 hours. I should take this to our lab. I wish you wouldn't. I'd be happy if you'd let me fight my own battles." Detective Porter regarded Kyle. He wasn't suspicious. He didn't need to be, because he knew Kyle intended to repay the whipping and humiliation Steve had showered him with last week. "Kyle, I love to watch a good bare-chested brawl, but unfortunately I'm going to have to arrest both participants and witnesses. I also love to watch an outsider come back strong and take back what he lost. Steve is a big guy, and he trains hard in this gym. It doesn't matter. Hey, what I don't know won't hurt me. Just give yourself time to heal longer. Kyle nodded. Detective Porter wished him the best and made sure Kyle put his phone number on the speed dial list on his cell phone. It was getting dark. That night, Steve brought Ginny home from the county jail. Her hair was disheveled and her clothes were a mess. They both entered the house, but Steve waited at the door and she walked into the living room alone. "Hi," she said meekly. Kyle just stared at her with an absent expression. "I heard you were hurt, so I came home early." Everything inside him was exploding. He wanted terribly to jump out of his chair and scold her for her feigned concern, for coming home 2 whole days earlier than she should have, from a trip he shouldn't have taken to have an affair he didn't understand and couldn't approve of. But outwardly, he showed only calmness. That's right. She was surprised at the lack of emotion on his part. After he'd begged her to stay, crying and covering himself with his bag, she'd expected more. "Are you okay now?" "I'll heal. We need to talk." "No, we don't. We talked last week." "Kyle, we can't just let this fester in our minds. You have to discuss this with me. I need to know what to expect." Expect a separation and then a divorce. Expect you to walk away from me and never take me back. Expect me to treat you with the respect any other man deserves, but without the love and care I felt for you a week ago. That was partly what she expected, but she hadn't expected him to be so calm and nonchalant, so she would stay here for a couple days and then move out once she got her affairs in order. She set her bag down and turned to sit down. "I said you were leaving." She turned and looked at him with a perplexed look. "I meant now, go away. I don't think you understand what's going on here. I may have hurt you, I may have ruined our marriage, but I haven't given you any rights to my house or property. I will move into the guest room, but I will stay here until I pack up my things and move out of here." Before she could continue her tirade, Kyle flicked the remote in his hand. The stereo system he had installed throughout the house turned on and played a recording of last Friday's events. It was clearly audible as she wryly belittled him, saying she was going on vacation with a real man, and he wouldn't be able to stop her. It was heard Steve laughing as she told Kyle that she planned to have sex with Steve all week, if not longer, until she was satisfied. Kyle begged her to stay and work things out, whimpering pitifully and trying to hold on to her bag. As she left, her heels clicked noisily on the floor and Steve said, "Tough luck for the little wimp." After the door slammed shut, there was the sound of the door opening and Ginny called out in the distance, "Come on, Steve." He withdrew and then could be heard saying to Kyle, "Just so you don't get any ideas of following us or trying to stop us." This was followed by the sound of Steve beating Kyle. Steve could be heard grunting as he delivered numerous blows to Kyle's ribs, and even worse was hearing him taunting Steve, telling him that he was going to beat the crap out of him tonight. Walking away, Steve threw him a parting glance. "Now your head is as broken as your weak heart. Lie in your blood and think for an hour or two. You'll realize she needs a big dog to keep her happy. But she'll come back to you when she realizes that a big male dog can't stay with one bitch for long." Kyle looked at an exhausted Ginny. Steve appeared in the doorway, looking at Kyle with a frown. "Why, you sneaky little coward?" Kyle stopped him, wagging a finger at him. "Porter doesn't have the tape, but he'll get it if I want it. I don't want him to put you in jail. I want a second fight." Ginny was horrified. Steve grinned from ear to ear. "I'm proposing a bet. You both have to agree and your terms will be different or there's no deal, and Porter gets the sound file in 10 minutes via email. In 6 weeks, as soon as the cast comes off my arm and my ribs heal." "You can't win." Steve shook his head. "No, I can't win after that cheap shot last week. This time we're going to fight fair and square. No sneaking up from behind and cold, stabbing an unsuspecting victim, coward. You'll see me coming and you won't be able to stop me the way I was able to stop you lying unconscious last week. Are you sure you can win on those terms? With your bare hands, man to man, no weapons?" "I'll tear you apart. Bet your gym." Steve looked at him again. He didn't want to take a risk on this scale. He owned the gym and the building it was in. There were several offices in the building that were profitable tenants, and it was an incredible cash cow. His apartment occupied the top floor of the building and was a luxurious space, overlooking Long Island Sound. But Steve didn't believe this guy could be a competitor for an athlete like him. Sure, David had defeated Goliath, but David had a slingshot. "Argue with all your gyms." Steve paused, reflecting on his burgeoning business. Not only did he have a flagship club, but he had 6 branches across the city, and they were thriving to the point where he was thinking of selling the franchise. What, put all that against your house and all that fancy electronic equipment? Are you out of your mind? No, my house and equipment are not for sale. You're putting this tape and all the copies on the line. You're staking jail time and the loss of all your assets later in civil court. You're putting your business, your real estate, on the line. Silence hung in the room. Steve realized he was going to have to fight for his freedom. And your cars. Steve had several vintage and late-model Corvettes, one from each decade since the 50s. They were his pride and joy, and the whole town knew it. The stakes were incredibly high, but Steve considered Kyle a trifle. It's a deal. And the lake house. Okay. All the cards are in your hands, aren't they? I'll risk everything. But there's really no risk at all. I'll grind you down. Kyle looked at Ginny. She had listened to him betting for Steve, and now she was getting ready to hear how she was risking it. If I win, I want everything and for you to leave. Not contest the divorce, not take anything from this house or our cottage, not a dime from our bank account or investments. You have to watch every minute of the fight. You also have to live with Steve before the fight, and if I win, for a whole year afterward. Ginny flinched but nodded in agreement. She knew Steve was strong, but she also knew what kind of shape Kyle was in, how much he ran. She'd seen him handling spools of cable and pipes backstage that usually required 2 people to move. Kyle? He looked at her with the same blank expression, and she felt resentful again that she couldn't understand him. What if I'd rather bet on you? You already made that choice last week. This week, your choice is freedom or prison. Blackout. The weeks passed quickly, and Kyle spent them recovering his strength. He started doing lighting projects again. His absence from the stage had left a bit of a void, and his return was greeted with joy. At every turn he was asked about the attack, but he refused to give details. The circumstances surrounding his wife were the source of many rumors. It was widely known that she was now living with Steve. There were those who suspected the truth and waited to see how Kyle would behave. He was known for his stubbornness, and none of these people believed that he would begrudgingly endure the beating and kidnapping of his wife. The stories of Jeannie abandoning Kyle at his most difficult moment and being so loved made her a pariah in the theater community. It was fight night. Kyle came into the gym in a t-shirt and sweatpants. Steve was already in the ring, dressed in ridiculous-looking boxer shorts and a t-shirt with the gym's logo on it. Jeannie sat sullenly at the table, holding an envelope containing Steve's titles and contracts, his bets. Steve was surrounded by many of his friends, as well as employees and customers of the gym. They were all cheering him on, encouraging him and teasing him that he had an easy job ahead of him. They made even more noise when Kyle walked into the gym. Kyle, with his light runner's body, looked out of place compared to Steve's powerful body. Kyle walked past Ginny and placed his folio of contracts and records on the table next to Steve's desk. Climbing into the ring, he said, "Let's go. No challenges, no referees, no stoppages until one of us is defeated." Steve smirked, made his way to the ropes, and held out his hand to Kyle. Kyle looked at it and, without taking it, delivered a punch to Steve's nose. Steve looked up stunned, a trickle of blood flowing from his right nostril. "No bells," Kyle said, biting Steve again. Steve's imposing physique gave him an imposing appearance, but he wasn't as flexible as Kyle. His stiff frame slowed his reactions, and he moved worse than Kyle. Steve ran after Kyle, but couldn't get his big body to react fast enough to pin down the speedy Kyle. Every time he got close enough to land a punch, Kyle made him pay for it with a flurry of jabs to the face. Soon, Steve's face was swollen, and he slowed down his attempts to corner Kyle. Steve soon realized that his position in the center of the ring was no better. Kyle didn't look that big, but he was a short man and had a significant advantage in punching distance. Plus, he kept the pace high while Steve tired of a lot of punches, the best of which barely reached their target. As Steve tired, Kyle began throwing punches to his body. Soon Steve's arms grew heavy and drooped. Kyle pulled him toward him. "That's enough, Steve. You can barely stand. You can't defend yourself. You've lost." Steve stared at him, breathing hard. Both eyes were swollen shut, his nose was bleeding, and there was a nasty cut under the only eye that could still see. "Surrender, and I'll leave you more than you deserve. Apologize to everyone. Surrender now, and I'll take this hall, this building, and the 58 convertible. You keep the rest. If you don't surrender now, I'll knock you out and keep everything." Steve realized he was defeated. His head had already lowered and his body sank to its knees. "I apologize." Kyle walked over to the desk and pulled out the paperwork for the building, the gym, and the title to the 58 vet. Taking the keys in his hands, he looked around at the incredulous gathering of Steve's friends and associates. "I'm closing the gym and opening a theater school here. I will honor the employment contracts you have with Steve, but will expect you to work for me in a useful capacity. If he transfers you to one of his other gyms, I will release you from your contractual obligations here. For those of you who rent the building, I will honor the terms of your contracts and negotiate fairly when they are up. However, there will be a different atmosphere here as this space will be converted into a theater. If you choose to terminate your lease due to these changes, I will release you." Ginny stared at Kyle incredulously. They had long dreamed of creating a community of theater professionals and enthusiasts dedicated to the advancement of the theater arts. Not only was he realizing their dream without her, but he had the means to do so thanks to her betrayal. She felt completely abandoned. She suddenly felt very lonely and cold. The color disappeared from her face and she stared at a battered Steve. There wasn't a drop of pigment on his face, already blackened with bruises and reddened with blood from the cuts his friends had just bandaged. Steve had never looked so pathetic, so broken. Kyle had never looked so brave. There was no gloating or arrogance in him, just the cold confidence with which he did everything. Fade to black. 6 months later, Ginny was still living with Steve. Neither of them had been interested in the other sexually since the fight. Nevertheless, they had to live together as part of their bet. It was a lukewarm coexistence as each saw the other as the reason for the failure of their lot in life. Ginny had quickly and quietly moved out of her house, which was now entirely Kyle's. The divorce had been finalized a long time ago. Kyle didn't speak to her after the fight and didn't pick up the phone when she tried to call. Steve continued to build his business, but growth slowed when word got out about his failure in the ring. He salvaged what he had by offering season tickets aimed at seniors and moms who didn't exercise outside the home. 2 of his satellite gyms closed, and the rest lost their glamour. He'd lost his penthouse when his building was taken over by Kyle and had been forced to move into a small apartment next to one of the remaining gyms, which now served as his flagship. Now his swagger wasn't as cocky and was often absent altogether. Instead of the aura of confidence he had exuded before the episode with Kyle, he seemed much less menacing. His mood was often sullen, and he was constantly worried about finances, as he no longer received rent from his downtown building to support other businesses. Kyle had successfully converted the main gym into a great theater space. He converted smaller rooms into rehearsal spaces, stores, and dressing rooms. He carved out space for a small, intimate cabaret theater and opened a coffee shop with a small stage on the second floor. The summer season was already planned, and the town was buzzing with excitement about the opportunities Kyle offered for actors and audiences of all ages. As you might expect, Kyle was so consumed with setting up store that it seemed as if he'd forgotten all about the entire attack that had taken place less than a year ago. But he still remembered everything vividly. He remembered every night when he walked through his own front door. He remembered every night when he fell asleep in his lonely room. He remembered every time he walked into the theater where he and Ginny were working on a project. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake off the memory of being together for half a lifetime and still not knowing the woman he thought was the love of his life. One evening, he was working on a light story in his studio when the doorbell rang. It was Ginny's brother, Peter. Peter lived in Boston and rarely left the city. In all the time he and Kyle had been together, he had only visited Ginny twice. His presence meant something was wrong. "Hey Kyle, I'm sorry to bother you, but I really need to talk to you about my sister. Would you mind if I came by?" Sensing the urgency in Peter's words, Kyle stepped aside and ushered him into the living room. He offered him a cup of coffee or a beer, but Peter declined. "I'd really like to get to the reason I came to see you. I'm very sorry things have gotten so bad between you two. I thought you two were a wonderful couple, and I want you to know that our entire family was shocked by my sister's sudden change of heart. She's determined to hold up her end of the bargain. She realizes she was stupid to put you in harm's way, but her life with Steve just isn't right." "She chose Steve over me," Kyle muttered. It seemed appropriate to me that she get exactly what she wanted. She chose the affair. She made a mistake and cruelly betrayed you, and no one blames you for how you reacted. She did a stupid thing, but life with Steve is torture, and now he's also given her physical strength. He hit her and broke her nose last night. Kyle hated to hear that Ginny was being abused. He wanted her to come to terms with Steve's stupidity, his early American style of dress, his life as a gym rat. He wanted her to be disgusted by Steve's sexist comments and expectations, his selfish attitude, his inexhaustible vanity. "Take me to her," he said to Peter. "She's in the car. She doesn't want to come in. She's too proud. She didn't want me to come in, and she's very angry. I just want you to release her from her promise to live with Steve for a year. She doesn't even want to do it, but I think he'll hurt her more next time." Kyle slowly stood up and headed for the door. Peter followed him. "Please talk to her gently, Kyle. She's been through hell, and even though she brought it on herself, she's suffered enough." Kyle walked over to the car and opened the door. "Please come in," he said to Ginny. "We need to talk." Ginny reluctantly but slowly got out of the car. She walked into the house and Kyle whispered to Peter, "She'll be fine. Go to Steve's and get her things and bring them here." Kyle led Ginny into the kitchen. A flood of memories came over her. Kyle hadn't changed a thing. Everything smelled the same, looked the same, felt like home. The only difference was that all of her pictures were gone. Kyle had replaced them with pictures of her family. Tears came to her eyes because being cut out of her home was just awful. She considered it her home since she hadn't had time to get a new one yet, and life with Steve was a temporary hell. She hadn't been replaced, just cut out of this place she had once loved. Kyle was well aware that she was crying, and though he was touched by the woman who was still the greatest love of his life, he didn't go to Ginny. Instead, he poured her a cup of coffee and made her coffee the way she always liked it. He made her coffee like no one else, not even Ginny herself. The smell of the steaming brew in the mug and the perfect blend brought her back to herself, reminding her once again how perfect her husband and the life she had left behind were. "You're moving away from Steve. Peter is picking up your stuff now. You're going to move here. You can stay in the little apartment we built over the garage. You'll be independent. When you get well again and start working, you can move out whenever you want. If you want, I'll get you a job at my new store. If you decide not to move out, you can stay here as long as you want. I do not wish to witness any romantic relationship, though I do intend to bring home dates if I wish. I expect you to take good care of your apartment, show care for my property, and respect our neighbors and guests. These are the only terms of living here. There will be no rent, no expectations or promises of any relationship other than a promise to observe decorum. Somewhere inside me, I will always love you. Elsewhere, I will always fear what it is in you that could have betrayed me the way you did. I didn't want Steve to bully you, so I don't expect you to end the year with him." Swallowing back a tear, she looked into Kyle's eyes for the first time in months and thanked him. She muttered something about moving in with Peter, but Kyle reminded her that the New York theater scene was her life and she couldn't exist without it for long. She realized he was right and agreed to move. "You wait here. I'll help Peter. Make yourself at home." The meaning of his last word was music to her ears. It was getting dusk. Kyle pulled up behind Peter's car. He walked straight to Steve's house as if the man was his master. Steve didn't like it, but there was nothing to object to. He'd hit Jeannie, and now he found himself here with her brother and the guy who'd publicly flogged him. Either of them could have sent him to jail for abuse, and Peter was using this moment as a slave driver. Steve carried Ginny's things to the car. Peter helped him pack, but it was Steve who carried it. There wasn't much stuff since the terms of the divorce agreement left her with only a couple memorabilia and clothes. Steve returned to the house after the last trip. He started to speak. "Don't say a word." Kyle was seething with rage. "You know what's about to happen, don't you?" Steve didn't want to hear it. "You broke her nose. You hit a little woman and ruined her face by breaking her nose. Stand up." Steve looked at him, but obediently stood up. Kyle stood up as well. He walked right up to Steve, and before Steve or Peter could guess what was going to happen, Kyle broke Steve's nose with a swift right punch. A shade of black. 3 years later. Jeannie is still living in Kyle's apartment. She's not dating, but she's thinking about starting. She is one of Kyle's most valued colleagues, working as a manager, director, and teacher at his theater center. She considers Kyle her best friend and respected boss. She has written a play that has been successful in regional theaters and published by a major publisher. She is financially independent and is becoming like the old Ginny. The fact that Kyle accepted Ginny back into his life was taken as a signal by neighbors, family, and the theater community. She was accepted in those circles in almost the same status as she had been all those months ago, though no one had forgotten where she had been. Steve sold his business and after some reflection, came to the conclusion that he didn't like what a lowlife he was. He eventually found a use for his college degree in physical education by taking a job at a local elementary school. He became passionate about working with children with physical disabilities and other special needs. He became a Special Olympics coach and volunteered in the physical therapy department at a local children's hospital. Kyle's theater project flourished, and his programs were accredited by a local university. His programs for high school students are highly regarded and have become very profitable. His professional productions pack full auditoriums and attract the attention of New York's top critics, who usually don't stray far from Broadway theaters. Kyle and Ginny lived close to each other, but rarely socialized. Although he took care of her when she needed help, he did so out of a sense of responsibility. She was the love of his life, and he couldn't see her in complete turmoil, beaten down and rejected by the society that ran the profession she lived for. Having gotten her into a safe place, he wanted nothing more from her. He dealt with her professionally. After all, she was good at what she did and was a great asset to his company. However, he didn't see her in any other light and rarely interacted with her even on a friendly level. Ginny saw her position in Kyle's life as a blessing. She wasn't in jail, she was working, and she could make it up to Kyle in some way. It seemed to her that living next to him with no chance of him loving her again was better than the alternative. It was impossible to truly make it up to him, but maybe if she stayed here until she saw him happily settled with a new love and perhaps a family, she could find peace. It was inevitable. Kyle had fallen in love with a divorced woman he'd met on the Cape. She lived in a neighboring cottage with her brother's family and young daughter. She moved in with Kyle in the fall, and in October they were married in a beautiful but small ceremony in the backyard of Kyle's house. Ginny had declined the invitation to attend the ceremony, but watched the proceedings from her bedroom window, the only window that had a view. She cried bitter tears as she recalled the events that had brought her to this moment, and now the last chapter was complete. Tears fell on the last small suitcase. The rest she had already loaded into the rental car parked outside the garage. When everyone had gathered at Kyle's house for dinner, Ginny picked up her bag and got into the car. Before she drove off, she took one last look at Kyle's house. She knew he would find the goodbye letter she had left on his desk as soon as she returned from her honeymoon. She checked her bag one more time to make sure she had her ticket, passport, and signed contract for her new job as a stage manager in London. Kyle had a new life now. She shed one last tear and set out to find hers. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.